Mr. Bailey, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And I'm conscious that this subject has been raised before, and yet it remains possible for people in the UK to be referred by an NHS professional to a psychotherapist for gay conversion therapy, the so-called gay cure. Mr. Bailey, being gay is not a disease. Being gay is not an illness. It is not something that I or any other gay man or woman can be cured of. To suggest otherwise is not just demeaning, it's morally and medically wrong. Not a single medical body supports the concept of gay cure. Neither the Royal College of Psychiatrists, the UK Council for Psychotherapy, the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, and the British Medical Association have all concluded that such therapy is unethical and potentially harmful. Mr. Bailey, various techniques and methods have been used in the past, and I'll just list a few of them just to give a bit of colour to the level of quackery that we have seen on this subject. Exorcism, and in fact in the Times today there is a young man who was taken to a backstreet exorcist because his parents were concerned he was gay. Then there is cycling. Apparently cycling was a cure for being gay, and I can tell colleagues that as a keen cyclist, that one doesn't work. Then, of course, there is prayer. Apparently, you can pray away the gay. That doesn't appear to work either. Or there is the Austrian doctor who trialled testicular transplants, who took testicles from a heterosexual man and transplanted them into a homosexual man to see if that curbed his homosexual desires. Unfortunately, I couldn't see the outcome of the trial anywhere on the internet, but I'm sure it was of interest to both recipient and donors of the testicles. And I only mention those because it is just an example of how far from the mainstream some so-called cures can be. And it's a far cry for some mainstream psychotherapy. I wanted to put that on record. But I do want to focus on some of the current techniques. And I think it's important to debunk the thought that such so-called cure therapies might be simply gentle counselling, lying on the couch and talking about one's feelings. They are not gentle therapies. Such therapies purport to change a person's sexual orientation or reduce their attraction to people of the same sex. Dr. Christian Jessen, for a TV programme in just 2014, underwent treatment for homosexuality. One of the most extreme cures is aversion therapy. The therapy looks to teach patients to associate same-sex attraction with pain or nausea. Patients are given a drug which makes them violently ill, and they are then shown pornographic images and sound recordings whilst they violently vomit. That is not counselling. And usually patients would experience a session every 2 hours, night and day, for 3 whole days. That is not counselling. Then there is electric shock treatment, where a person responding to same-sex stimuli is shocked so the response is associated with pain. That is not counselling. Now, Mr. Bailey, imagine the outcry if in this place our Parliament gave tacit approval to curing heterosexual men and women with their heterosexuality. Imagine if it was in reverse. It would be an uproar. If we allowed conversion therapy to try and turn our straight colleagues gay, it would simply not last a day. And yet we allow therapists to peddle the myth that they can cure people of being gay. And it would be laughable if such views were held simply by crackpots on the fringe of society. It is not. There are some psychotherapists and some NHS staff who have the view that a gay cure is possible. Recent YouGov polling for Stonewall, the excellent LGBT rights organisation, found that 1 in 10 health and social care staff have heard staff express a belief in gay cure therapy. In London, that figure rose to 1 in 5, and that was in 2014. Just 6 years ago, in 2009, the BMC Psychiatry Journal surveyed over 1,300 accredited medical professionals. Over 200, more than 15% of them, had offered some form of conversion therapy. Those 200 plus medical professionals said that 35% of their patients were referred to by GPs. And 40% of those patients with the so-called treatment were treated in an NHS practice. For any health professional to refer someone for such so-called therapy is fundamentally abhorrent, and it's time to call a halt to it once and for all. So where are we today? Despite numerous calls for an outright ban, the practice continues. I accept there has been some progress. In January of this year, the Memorandum of Understanding on Conversion Therapy in the UK was launched, developed by the UK Council for Psychotherapy and signed up by some major organisations, including the NHS. It's welcome, as far as it goes. However, there remain a number of regulators as yet to sign up, and it's voluntary. And the memorandum seems to cover just sexual orientation, but not gender identity, and it's voluntary. The memorandum says practitioners need to be aware of the ethical issues relating to such cure therapies and that the public should be made aware of the risks of such therapies, and it's voluntary. The memorandum seeks to apply standards to a sector of therapy that has no statutory regulation because it's voluntary. We regulate dentists, but we don't have statutory regulation for psychotherapists. My honourable friend, the Minister, I know has an impeccable record in LGBT issues, especially in health issues. And I'd like to put on record that I know that on this issue and many others, she has a deep commitment to helping eradicate flaws in the system and pursuing equality. So I do have to ask, why are we allowing this abuse, this so-called cure therapy, to continue? Why are we allowing the practitioners, the psychotherapists, to simply have a voluntary code of practice, simply a memorandum of understanding? Mr. Bailey, I acknowledge that psychotherapy has a role to play for adults who need support when dealing with a range of issues connected with their sexuality and their sexual identity. Dealing with conflicting feelings is difficult at the best of times, and I do accept the role of proper regulated counselling.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and congratulate him for securing this debate. Would he agree with me that the availability of such programmes would have a serious effect on the mental health of LGBT individuals?
My honourable friend makes a very good point. I mean, all the evidence, in fact, I go on to quote the Royal College of Psychiatry, who say that such therapies are damaging, not just to the physical health, but also the mental health of the individuals who could have these aversion therapies inflicted upon them. Of course.
Just on that point, I want to congratulate him on raising this very important issue. Is he as disturbed as I am to see the figures in the United States that show that people who have gone through this conversion therapy face 8.9 times the rates of suicide and so 5.9 times the rates of depression of their peers, and that 3 times as many are likely to take part in illegal substances as a result of this frankly outdated and cruel method.
My friend makes an extremely powerful point, and I'm not surprised to hear those figures. Anybody who is conflicted and needing support while they come to terms with their sexuality is going through some difficult feelings. So then to be told that they can be cured, and I've yet to find where that cure has actually been proved successful, then has to deal with those feelings, of course.
Many thanks to the honourable gentleman for giving way. I speak both as a member of Parliament and as a psychologist, and can indicate that throughout all of my experience and practice, this is not something that I'm familiar with in terms of my NHS practice, although you do indicate that there are a number of cases. However, I think it's important to recognise that it is indeed without any evidence basis, and not surprisingly, given that most of the research findings indicate that it can actually have an adverse impact upon people's mental health rather than any cures per se.
The member makes a good point, and I have to say that no one I know has actually come forward to support such psychotherapy, and yet if we have such violent agreement, why we struggle to get aversion therapy banned. So there is this conundrum that we all agree it's harmful, we all agree it shouldn't be done, and yet we don't seem to be able to get it banned. But I do accept that my honourable friend, the Minister, has difficulty within the sector and regulating in terms of setting legal definitions and what would constitute illegal therapies. And I do realise that the legal situation is fraught. But I do say that it is not acceptable to leave vulnerable men and women susceptible to aversion therapy. There can be no justification for pursuing therapies that have risks to a person's mental health and in some therapies their physical health. And it is time to say that such therapies have no place in our society and no place in our healthcare system. It's time to simply say aversion therapy has no medical merit, can be harmful, and it's time to say it is going to be illegal. It's also time to ensure that psychotherapy has a statutory regulation so that those who do not comply and perpetuate such cure therapies have stricter and harsher penalties than what is currently available under a voluntary code. Mr Bailey, in concluding, the Royal College of Psychiatrists contacted me last week to reiterate that the college remains in favour of legislative efforts to ban such conversion therapies. They said in their letter to me, there is no scientific evidence that sexual orientation can be changed. And they said so-called treatments can create a setting in which prejudice and discrimination flourish, and there is evidence that they are potentially harmful. Of course.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way and for securing this debate and all the work he does to champion LGBT equality. The Core Issues Trust, in the interesting briefing I'm sure many of us received, suggested that there is a link between sexual orientation, or at least homosexuality and same-sex attraction, and mental ill health and other forms of physical illness. But haven't they got it the wrong way round? It's the discrimination and, in fact, the suggestion that there could be a gay cure, which is making young people in particular, but all LGBT people, feel that they're different, that somehow they're alien, and that's what's causing the mental ill health, not homosexuality itself.
The honourable gentleman, I know, has a track record in this area, though he's new to the House, and I'm sure that he will be extremely vocal on such issues, but he's absolutely right. It is the point of saying it is a disease, it is an illness that can be cured, that drives the mental issues, mental health issues, not the other way around. And I I wasted no time in reading the briefing from Core Issues. So I would like to finish really on a couple of comments from esteemed colleagues. On the 29th of April, Mr Bailey, in an interview with Pink News, the Prime Minister said about banning such therapies, if we need to go further, we will. And I think that, as far as I'm concerned, we do need to go further. Nicky Morgan, Secretary of State for Education and Minister for Women and Equalities, said just a couple of weeks ago, again to Pink News, she said, let me be clear, gay cure therapies have no place in our country and we must stamp them out. So I ask my honourable and very good friend, the Minister, if she will agree to explore how stipulated aversion therapies could be banned and whether the voluntary memorandum of understanding should be and can be reviewed to put it on a statutory footing. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered gay conversion therapies and the NHS. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Bailey, and thank you very much to my honourable friend for bringing this debate on this important issue. And let me start by wholeheartedly agreeing with his opening premise. This government does not believe that being lesbian, gay or bisexual is an illness to be treated or cured. We are concerned, therefore, about the issue of so-called gay to straight conversion therapy, and we've consistently spoken out against the need for this practice. I will sort of outline some of the background to the work that my honourable friend has touched on, as well as sort of trying to respond to some of his concerns. But I suspect this is a beginning of an ongoing conversation. I'm very happy to say that at the outset. The UK Council for Psychotherapy first raised their concerns about the perceived increase of this type of therapy with the Department of Health in late 2013, and department officials met with them to discuss the concerns and agreed to work with them and others to identify ways to eradicate this practice. At that time, we also welcomed the fact that the key professional counselling and psychotherapeutic bodies in this country had already made public statements on the issue. As a result of the approach by the UK Council for Psychotherapy, the Department agreed to support the publication of a statement, making it clear that the major therapy bodies in the UK united in speaking out against conversion therapy. This is because they believe that particular approach is based on the assumption that homosexuality is a mental disorder or begins from a preconceived view that the client should change their sexual orientation. As homosexuality is not an illness, as my honourable friend has said, the professional bodies argue it is both logically and ethically flawed to offer any kind of treatment. In fact, the House might be interested to know the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from its diagnostic glossary of mental disorders in 1973, and the international classification of diseases produced by the WHO eventually followed suit in 1992. A consensus statement was published in February 2014 as a result of the exercise that we convened and was initially signed by 8 organisations, with others adding their support later on. And that statement is clear that those bodies believe there's no good evidence this type of therapy works and actually great potential to cause harm. It goes on to say that often these approaches are based on religious interpretations about sexuality rather than a researched and informed understanding of sexual orientation. The Department, as my honourable friend has said, agreed to host a roundtable event on the 2nd of April 2014, to which we invited a range of interested organisations comprising signatories to the consensus statement, but also Royal Colleges, the Association of Christian Counsellors, regulators and other counselling bodies. The then Minister, responsible for equalities, was fully supportive of this work and attended and contributed. I'm pleased to say it was a positive meeting. Out of the discussions came agreement that more could and should be done by those present to prevent this kind of therapy being offered, and the participants agreed to develop the memorandum of understanding which has been referred to. The UK Council for Psychotherapy agreed to lead on the work in partnership with other bodies and with the department. It was published in January of this year and was launched at a second roundtable event at the department. Once again, my former colleague, the Right Honourable Member for North Norfolk, was present and publicly made his support for the MOU and its commitments very clear. And the purpose of that was to set out an agreed framework for activities for all the parties concerned to help address the issues raised by this practice. One of the aims, for example, is to ensure that the public are well informed about the lack of evidence and the risks of so-called conversion therapy, and a range of other important professional objectives. Professionals from across the healthcare and psychological professions are committed to work together to promote the public interest here. And each of the signatory organisations committed to actions appropriate to their function and purpose. To give one example, Mr Bailey, those with practitioner members agreed to review their statements of ethical practice and consider whether there was a need for the publication of a specific ethical statement on conversion therapy. Another example is that those with responsibility for training committed to work together to make sure training prepares therapists sufficiently so that they can work effectively with their lesbian, gay or bisexual clients. That MOU is owned by the organisations who've signed it. They have continued to meet together and to work on those commitments throughout the year, and the department fully supports that work. He has drawn attention to the part of the NHS in this, and I certainly want to touch on that. Part of the discussions with the sector uncovered the fact that there were no reliable up-to-date figures on the use of conversion therapy. But a 2009 survey of 1,300 mental health professionals did find that more than 200 had tried to help at least one client to reduce the attraction they felt for somebody of the same sex, and a third were said to have been referred for therapy by a GP, and 40% of those were reportedly treated within the NHS, and as I say, that's a 2009 survey. The government is clear that monies from the public purse should not be used to fund such therapy. Ministers in the last administration wrote to NHS England in March 2014 seeking confirmation that this treatment was not taking place on the NHS. And I'm pleased to say we received a very robust and supportive response from Simon Stevens. Not everyone in the House may be aware of it, so I quote, "So-called gay to straight conversion therapy is harmful nonsense and the NHS should never be funding it." Of course.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. Clearly the memorandum has been effective since it's been introduced, but it does concern me that the briefing from Stonewall suggests that the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the Care Quality Commission, the GMC and the Health and Care Professionals Council aren't yet signatories. Does the Minister agree that really they should sign up, because it's clearly been helpful for other organisations involved and a powerful statement of intent?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention, and I think he'll see when I propose in terms of next steps that we might be able to incorporate and respond to his intervention. Simon Stevens went on to say that he would direct NHS England to make it clear and explicit in all public statements on the issue in future with regard to the NHS not funding. I mean, I can't be clearer than that, and if honourable members have examples of the NHS funding such therapy, I particularly would be very interested to know. Of course, my former colleague.
The debate, but also to my honourable friend the Minister for the work and the that she does to raise awareness of the needs of the LGBT community. But on this issue, of course, it's unacceptable for the NHS to sponsor these therapies. And, of course, all registered medical professionals can be disciplined by their professional bodies, be that the Royal College of Psychiatrists, the GMC can take action against doctors in these cases for discriminating against certain patients they look after. But isn't the real issue that actually the regulation isn't there for some therapists? And this is the very issue that needs to be looked into. Do we need to regulate more effectively some of the therapists in this field?
Well, I thank my honourable friend who speaks from a position of great knowledge on this. And I'm well aware of the challenge to the current position. You know, I will come to outline the current position, but I do so in the knowledge that it is challenged by honourable friends and other members. And I will, as I say, try and respond to that. I do want to just sort of make the point for the record that, you know, what we are not saying is that lesbians, gay men and bisexual people should not seek counselling or therapy if they are distressed about a particular aspect of their sexuality. It's very important that we recognise, for example, that family arguments over sexuality or hostility they're experiencing from other people might well be a reason why people seek support for that aspect of their life. And that's obviously a core part of what many therapists do. So I want to be quite clear that there is a place for that in supporting people appropriately. Very briefly, yes, if that's all right.
Can I pick you up on a point? Lesbian, gay, bisexual, but also transgendered people as well?
I am duly chastised, having recently given evidence to the excellent inquiry currently going on the committee, of which he is a member, of which the chairman of the committee has joined us in the chamber. I feel I duly correct myself, and thank the honourable member for that intervention. Now, I fully understand the concerns about so-called gay conversion therapy as they've been expressed, but the government has no current plans to ban or restrict it via legislation. We don't either have a plan currently to introduce statutory regulation for psychotherapists, but I say that in the knowledge that that is a position that is challenged and one to which I will sort of go away and reflect after the debate. However, the Health and Social Care Act of 2012 did introduce provisions to enable the accreditation of voluntary registers for unregulated healthcare professions and healthcare workers across the UK, social care workers in England, and certain students. And I don't think we should underestimate the fact that these voluntary registers are having an effect and can be effective. They're accredited by the Professional Standards Authority for Health and Social Care, where statutory regulation would neither be proportionate or an effective response to patient safety. And these accredited voluntary registers already do provide some safeguards for the public, and we do feel that they are working, and we have some examples of that. Both the Government and the Professional Standards Authority recommend that when a patient or service user chooses to visit a health or care practitioner who's unregulated, that only those registered on an accredited register are consulted. This ensures that those organisations that hold a voluntary register which has been accredited has been thoroughly assessed by the PSA, and also that it ensures these organisations handle complaints fairly and thoroughly, and in addition remove from the register any practitioner that's not allowed to join another. We have seen some examples, as I say, relatively recently, in one case where the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy did remove a practitioner from its register for professional malpractice associated with this sort of therapy. And the department is very clear that it encourages employers and commissioners when recruiting to choose those practitioners committed to the highest standards and who are registered on accredited registers. However, although we've decided at this stage not to take a legislative approach, I do want to wholeheartedly agree with my right honourable friend, the member for Loughborough, the Minister for Women and Equalities, who said recently, as my honourable friend quoted at the outset of the debate, that these therapies must be eradicated, and we want to keep up the momentum to do that. I think what I'd like to suggest to the House today is that as we pass the anniversary of the MOU, I would like to convene another roundtable in the new year where we ask the original signatories to report on their progress, and we challenge them to identify where we can be more ambitious to end this conversion therapy. I think that will be an opportunity to pick up some of the specific challenges that my honourable friend mentioned in his speech, opening the debate, as well as one or two of the points made in intervention as well. And I'm open to discussing how we bring those concerns raised, as I say, by honourable members to the attention of that group and who comprises that group. Although I think originally, as well as being some of the professionals in this area, it did have some of the organisations representing LGBT and transgender people. So I'm happy to do that and commit to do that. And as we work towards that event, I'm very happy to engage outside this chamber with honourable friends to look at where they think we can perhaps look to do more. This is a brief that I've taken on since the election. Specifically, before the election, I was the Minister for Inequalities. I'm now the Minister for Inequalities and Equalities. So I think that makes me even. But you know, it's a brief, as the honourable, my honourable friend said, it's a brief I take extremely seriously, and one that I've committed a huge amount of time to. I regularly, of course.
Minister, so I just sensed the Minister might be about to end. So I just thought I would thank you for giving way. Will the Minister accept that while a ban might not be appropriate, a stronger statement of guidance from the government, reflecting the comments of colleagues that she has read to all parts of our National Health Service, it will be welcome, not just because of the harm that these conversion therapies do to the individuals, but because of the signal that their availability sends to the wider public, that it is somehow abnormal to be gay, that being gay is a condition and that it can be cured. That is not acceptable in today's society, and our major public service should not be allowing the promotion of that idea in any part of it.
Well, I completely understand. I mean, he makes his point extremely well, my right honourable friend, and it's a very good point. I'm very happy to talk to Simon Stevens at our next regular meeting about this, but it is perhaps one of the issues that we can explore, you know, further at a further round table. But, you know, he makes an extremely fair point, and I can only reiterate what he has just said in terms of how we send those signals, and I will reflect on what more I can do to do that. And perhaps just in concluding, can I ask that honourable and right honourable members present, perhaps in anticipation of the next broad discussion about this issue, in particular seek the council and the insight from their local LGBT and transgender communities. I regularly guest chair my local LGBT forum in Wandsworth and find it a very useful opportunity to engage with issues and get up-to-date sort of insight. And if I can encourage all colleagues to do that, I think that will greatly inform our deliberations in the new year. But I will take away all the points being made and the continued challenge to the government to go further on this issue. I know that all members in this chamber present look forward to a time when this practice is a thing of the past.
The question is that this House has considered gay conversion therapies and the NHS. As many of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary? No? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.